When I moved into the quiet cul-de-sac of Maplewood Estates, I expected peace. The kind of peace that comes with freshly cut lawns, polite nods from neighbors, and the distant sound of sprinklers clicking in rhythm with the setting sun. What I didn't expect was the chaos that would soon follow, all because of an ostrich. The bird wasn't mine at first. It belonged to my uncle, a retired zookeeper who had raised exotic animals for decades. When he fell ill and couldn't care for them anymore, he called me with a favor that sounded almost absurd at the time. Would I take in his ostrich, Daisy? She was already accustomed to people, surprisingly gentle, and mostly kept to herself. I agreed, thinking it would be a few weeks at most. Little did I know, Daisy would become the most talked-about resident in the entire HOA. Daisy was magnificent. Nearly 7 feet tall, with sleek feathers that shimmered under the sun and long legs that moved with elegance and strength. She was intelligent, too, calm, curious, and oddly affectionate. She'd follow me around the yard like a giant shadow, inspecting every flower, rock, and fence post. My backyard was big enough for her to roam, enclosed securely with reinforced fencing. To me, she was part of the family. To the HOA, she was a violation waiting to happen. The first few weeks were quiet. A few neighbors saw Daisy from afar, usually stopping mid-walk to stare, whisper, and sometimes laugh in disbelief. But there was one person who didn't find her amusing at all. Karen. She lived 2 houses down. The self-proclaimed enforcer of HOA rules, always dressed like she was headed to a board meeting, clipboard in hand, and an expression permanently stuck between disapproval and suspicion. The day she spotted Daisy was the day my peace ended. It was early morning, and I was out trimming hedges when I noticed her standing at the edge of my driveway, phone in hand, recording. Her eyes darted between me and the bird behind the fence. Daisy, unbothered, was pecking at a shiny rock, her feathers fluttering softly in the breeze. Karen's lips moved silently as if counting violations only she could see. That evening, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my door. It was a formal HOA complaint citing unauthorized exotic wildlife and potential safety hazards to the community. It was signed by Karen herself in neat cursive. I wasn't surprised, but I was annoyed. I called the HOA office and explained that Daisy was not dangerous, properly contained, and temporary. The representative sounded understanding, even sympathetic. But rules were rules. They needed documentation, permits, and a site inspection. I agreed, confident everything would be fine. Karen, however, wasn't satisfied with waiting for paperwork. Over the next few days, I caught her lingering near my property line, peering through the fence slats. Once, she even brought her small dog, a yapping ball of fur, to test if the ostrich would react. Daisy didn't flinch, only turned her long neck toward the noise with mild curiosity. That seemed to irritate Karen even more. Rumors began to spread. A few neighbors asked if I really had a wild animal living with me. Someone joked that I was running a backyard zoo. Even the mailman seemed hesitant to walk up the driveway. I tried to ignore it, keeping to myself and caring for Daisy as usual. But the gossip grew, feeding Karen's obsession. Then one afternoon she went too far. It was quiet and warm, the kind of lazy Sunday where even the wind seemed to rest. I was inside washing dishes when I heard the faint creak of my backyard gate. At first I thought it was the wind, but then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too close. I rushed out the back door and froze. Karen was in my yard. Somehow she'd unlatched the gate and was standing just a few feet from Daisy, holding up her phone like she was collecting evidence. Daisy, startled by the sudden intrusion, took a few steps back. Her wings flared slightly, a defensive gesture. She wasn't aggressive, but she didn't like strangers cornering her. Karen, however, either didn't understand or didn't care. She stepped closer, muttering under her breath, circling as though inspecting a criminal. The air grew tense. I could feel it. Daisy could too. Before I could shout or move, Karen made the mistake that would seal her fate. She tried to corner the ostrich. She extended her arm, motioning as if to block Daisy's path, forcing the bird against the fence. Daisy's eyes widened, her long neck arching high, body tense. There was a split second of silence, a pause before nature took over. Then, with the power of pure instinct, Daisy delivered a kick. It was fast, almost too fast to see. A blur of feathers and force. The sound echoed like a drumbeat, sharp and sudden. Karen stumbled backward, her phone flying from her hand, landing face down in the grass. For a moment, everything froze. Daisy stood tall, calm again, while Karen clutched her leg, gasping in shock. The kick hadn't caused serious harm, but it sent a clear message. This was Daisy's space, and she wasn't to be toyed with. I rushed to help, more out of responsibility than sympathy. Karen refused, staggering toward the gate, muttering threats about lawsuits and animal control. By the time she reached the sidewalk, half the neighborhood had gathered, drawn by the commotion. She limped home, humiliated, while Daisy returned to pecking at the grass as if nothing had happened. That evening I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to let embarrassment fade quietly. She'd be back, angrier and more determined than before. As the sun dipped below the rooftops and the streetlights flickered on, I watched Daisy from the porch. She stood by the fence, serene and unbothered, the picture of calm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Karen had declared war, and this time, it wouldn't just be about HOA rules. The morning after the kick, the neighborhood felt different. There was an uneasy stillness in the air, the kind that lingers after a storm but before the next one starts. People avoided eye contact as I walked to the mailbox. A few waved half-heartedly, others whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. Karen's name floated through those hushed conversations like static, sharp, repetitive, and unavoidable. By noon, I didn't need to guess what she was up to. A white animal control truck pulled into the cul-de-sac, followed by a black SUV with the HOA logo stamped on the side. Out stepped Karen, her leg wrapped in a brace, dark sunglasses hiding her expression but not her fury. She pointed toward my house as the officials stepped out, and the message was clear. She was out for blood, or at least eviction. The animal control officer was polite but cautious. He introduced himself, explained that they'd received multiple complaints about an aggressive exotic animal, and asked to inspect the property. I agreed, keeping my tone even, though I could feel Karen's glare drilling into the back of my neck. Daisy stood quietly in her enclosure, unbothered by the commotion. The officer examined the fencing, checked the locks, and observed Daisy's behavior. She even walked close enough for him to note that the ostrich was calm and healthy. When he turned to me, his expression softened. "She seems fine," he said. "Well cared for. Honestly, I've seen dogs more aggressive than this bird." Karen's jaw tightened. "She attacked me," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "You're ignoring a dangerous situation." The officer stayed professional. "Ma'am, according to the report, you entered private property." The animal reacted defensively. Karen's face flushed with anger. Her voice rose, demanding escalation, higher authorities, stricter penalties, emergency hearings. The HOA representative, clearly uncomfortable, stepped in to calm her. He promised a full review, citing community safety concerns and bylaw enforcement procedures. By the time they left, Karen had stormed off, muttering about lawyers and viral footage. I didn't know then that she meant it literally. That evening, a neighbor texted me a link. I opened it and my stomach sank. Karen had posted a video titled, "Dangerous Bird Attack in Family Neighborhood. HOA ignored my warnings." It was heavily edited, of course, her shaky phone footage spliced with dramatic music and captions that exaggerated everything. The clip barely showed Daisy's calm demeanor before the incident. Instead, it ended right after the kick, followed by Karen's panicked scream. Within hours, the video had spread through local Facebook groups. Comments poured in, some sympathetic, others skeptical. A few people mocked her for trespassing, but the damage was done. The narrative was out there. I was the neighbor with a violent ostrich. The next few days were a blur of tension. HOA letters arrived, each one colder than the last. They demanded removal of the unauthorized livestock within 10 business days. If I didn't comply, I'd face daily fines and possible legal action. I filed an appeal, citing the bird's temporary status and my uncle's documented permit. But the HOA wasn't budging. Karen had stacked the board against me, rallying a few anxious residents to her side. At every meeting, she painted herself as the victim, a brave homeowner standing up for safety and order. I refused to give in quietly. If they wanted a battle, they'd get one. I set up cameras around the property, one facing the gate, another covering Daisy's enclosure. If anyone tried to tamper with things again, I'd have proof. I also reinforced the fencing and added clear private property signs. Everything was by the book, no loopholes left to twist. But Karen wasn't done. Late one night, I noticed motion alerts on my phone. The backyard cameras had picked up movement. Someone was near the fence. I opened the feed and saw a flashlight beam flickering along the edge of Daisy's pen. Then came a familiar figure, Karen wearing a hoodie, creeping closer with her phone raised like she was gathering evidence. I stepped outside quietly, heart pounding. The night was cold, the air still. I stayed hidden, watching as she pressed her phone between the slats, zooming in on Daisy. The bird stirred, shifting her weight, feathers rustling softly. Karen whispered something, probably narrating her investigation. Then Daisy moved. A low hiss came from her throat, a warning sound I'd only heard once before. Karen froze. The flashlight flicked up, catching the gleam of the ostrich's eyes in the dark. Daisy stepped forward, slow and deliberate, towering over the fence line. Karen stumbled back, nearly dropping her phone. She muttered something under her breath and bolted toward the street, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the grass. The next morning, she filed another complaint. This time, she claimed the ostrich had charged at her while she was documenting non-compliance. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting. Karen arrived with printed photos, screenshots, and what she called community testimonies. I arrived with time-stamped security footage showing her trespassing again. When the video played, the room went silent. There she was, clearly on my property, shining her flashlight into the enclosure. The footage ended just before she ran off, startled by Daisy's approach. The board members exchanged looks, some embarrassed, others frustrated. Karen's voice wavered as she tried to spin it into self-defense, but the evidence was too clear. They dismissed her second complaint, citing her unauthorized entry. I thought that would end it. I thought maybe she'd finally back off. But humiliation only fueled her more. That weekend, someone spread flyers around the neighborhood with photos from her video, warning about a violent ostrich on the loose. Kids were told to stay away from my house. Even deliveries were delayed because drivers didn't want to risk the bird attack zone. I could feel the isolation creeping in. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. The HOA ignored my calls. The fines kept stacking. And then, the breaking point arrived. It was a sunny afternoon when Daisy suddenly grew restless. She paced the fence, her feathers puffed, eyes darting toward the street. I stepped outside to check, and my heart sank. Karen was back. This time with two men from a private removal company, trucks idling by the curb. She had taken matters into her own hands. They were preparing to enter my property. Nets, tranquilizer poles, heavy gloves, the kind used for large animals. Karen stood nearby, smiling triumphantly, holding a folder that looked suspiciously like a forged authorization letter. Daisy paced faster, sensing the tension. The men moved toward the gate. That's when everything began to unravel. Again. The moment I saw the men approach the gate, a cold anger settled in my chest. The kind that comes when you realize someone isn't just trying to bother you anymore. They're trying to take something from you. Karen stood behind them, arms crossed, chin raised like a general watching her soldiers march into battle. The trucks idled nearby, the sound of the engines low and steady, a mechanical hum underlining her arrogance. The men were professionals, or at least they looked the part, matching uniforms, gloves, and calm, methodical movements. But the paper in Karen's hand told a different story. I'd seen enough HOA correspondence over the past few weeks to know that letter wasn't legitimate. The logo was printed wrong, the font slightly off, and the signature looked like it had been traced. I stepped outside before they could unhook the gate. My voice was even but sharp. I told them they were trespassing, that there was no official removal order, and that they needed to leave. They hesitated. Karen didn't. She pushed forward, waving the papers, shouting something about community rights and emergency HOA enforcement. The men exchanged glances. They clearly hadn't expected a confrontation, especially not one backed by security cameras aimed directly at them. I could see the flicker of doubt cross their faces, but Karen wasn't giving them a choice. She pointed toward Daisy's enclosure and told them to proceed. Daisy was watching it all. Her head tilted slightly, feathers shifting as the sunlight caught her dark eyes. She wasn't panicked, but she was alert, every muscle ready to react. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. One of the men unlatched the gate. That small sound, a metallic click, was enough to set everything in motion. The gate swung open and Daisy stepped back, startled but steady. The man with the net took a cautious step forward. He was murmuring something, probably to calm the bird, but Daisy didn't understand soothing words. She understood energy, and what she saw was threat. She moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Her long legs covered the distance between them in seconds. The man froze, caught off guard by her sheer size. Daisy stopped just short of him, her chest heaving, neck arched high. Her wings spread slightly, feathers fanning out like a warning flag. It wasn't aggression. It was fear and defense mixed into something primal. The man stumbled backward, dropping the net. His partner reached for the gate, shouting that they needed to leave. Karen's voice cut through the chaos, shrill and furious, ordering them to continue. But they were already retreating. Daisy hadn't touched them, hadn't kicked or charged again, but the message was clear. She wasn't going anywhere without a fight. The men hurried back to their truck, muttering to each other. Karen stood frozen, disbelief twisting her face into something almost unrecognizable. The papers in her hand fluttered in the breeze. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper, a hiss of anger under her breath. Then she turned on her heel and marched away, phone already raised to record another incident. I called the police before she could spin another lie. By the time they arrived, the removal crew was gone, and Karen was pacing at the edge of the sidewalk, gesturing wildly as she explained her version of events. I stayed calm, presented the security footage, and let the officers watch everything for themselves, from the fake paperwork to the forced entry attempt. It didn't take long for them to see the truth. Karen was warned for trespassing and for falsifying documents. The officers told her in no uncertain terms that she had no authority to remove an animal from private property. Her face turned a deep shade of red, but she kept her composure long enough to avoid handcuffs. When the officers left, she stormed off again, humiliated for the second time in a month. But humiliation only hardened her resolve. The next few days were quiet on the surface, but the tension never really left. The HOA stayed strangely silent. No letters, no emails, no updates on my appeal. The quiet almost felt like a setup. I focused on taking care of Daisy, who had returned to her calm, curious self, though she stayed closer to the center of the yard now, away from the fence. Then one night the storm broke. It was close to midnight when I woke to the sound of a thud outside. Not loud enough to be alarming at first, just strange. Then came another. I checked the cameras and froze. A shadow moved along the fence line, low and quick. Another followed. 2 figures, maybe 3. The night vision caught them clearly. Teenagers probably, wearing hoodies and carrying what looked like spray cans. At first I thought it was a prank. But then I saw the shapes on the fence, big ugly letters spelling danger, beware, and killer bird. I rushed outside, shouting before I even hit the porch steps. The figures bolted, dropping one of the cans as they ran. I chased them far enough to see them disappear into the next street. When I returned, I found a small pile of flyers near the mailbox. Cheap paper copies of Karen's online posts, plastered with her claims that Daisy had attacked innocent workers. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the porch, watching Daisy rest under the dim glow of the security light. By morning, the HOA meeting was already scheduled. Karen had wasted no time exploiting the vandalism, framing it as proof that the ostrich's presence endangered the community. She demanded immediate removal again, this time citing public outrage. The meeting was packed. Homeowners filled the small clubhouse, whispering, filming, waiting for another spectacle. Karen arrived in a pale suit, her leg brace gone, her confidence back in full force. I arrived with printed evidence, video clips, timestamps, copies of every notice, and proof of her forged document. When the discussion began, Karen spoke first, her tone dripping with false concern. She painted herself as the protector of the neighborhood, talking about fear, property values, and the traumatizing kick heard around the block. People nodded along, unsure but persuaded by her conviction. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply presented the truth. Every recording, every trespass, every action she'd taken. I showed the video of her climbing the fence, the fake document, and the police report that confirmed it. The room shifted. The murmurs stopped. The HOA president, who'd been quiet through most of it, finally spoke. He cleared his throat, his voice careful but firm. The board would deliberate, he said, but it was clear where things were heading. Karen's expression changed from defiance to panic. She interrupted, shouting that the footage was manipulated, that the HOA was corrupt. Her voice cracked, desperate now, no longer in control of the story. When the board asked her to sit down, she refused. She kept talking until security gently escorted her out of the room. It was over for the moment. That night I stood by the fence again, watching Daisy under the stars. She was calm, peaceful, her feathers catching the faint moonlight. The neighborhood around us was silent, except for the faint hum of streetlights. But deep down I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her never stopped when they were wrong. They doubled down. She'd lost her authority, her reputation, and her leverage. The next move she made would be personal, unpredictable, and dangerous. And she wouldn't come alone next time. For a few days it seemed like the neighborhood was finally breathing again. The HOA stopped sending letters, the gossip slowed, and Karen's house stayed dark most evenings. The tension that had once wrapped itself around Maplewood Estates began to loosen, if only slightly. I let myself believe that maybe after all the chaos, the situation had burned itself out. But people like Karen don't disappear. They wait. It started small. Trash scattered across my driveway in the middle of the night. Eggs thrown at the fence. My mailbox stuffed with shredded flyers about neighborhood safety. None of it was directly traceable, but the pattern was obvious. Someone wanted to make me uncomfortable, to drive me out quietly if they couldn't do it publicly. I didn't react. I just cleaned it up every time without a word. Silence bothered her more than anger ever could. Daisy remained unbothered through it all. She'd grown used to the sounds of cameras clicking and footsteps on the sidewalk. Her calm presence grounded me, a reminder that not everything in life needed to spiral into conflict. But one late evening, her calm broke, and that's when I knew something was wrong. It was around midnight when I heard her. A deep, low call, not panicked but alert. I looked through the window and saw her pacing near the far corner of the fence, feathers ruffled, head jerking toward the shadows beyond the property line. The security lights flicked on, but the motion sensors caught nothing. Still, Daisy wouldn't settle. I slipped on my jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside. The night air was heavy, the kind that made every sound feel closer than it should be. The beam of light swept across the yard, then over the fence. At first, nothing. Then, movement. A quick flash of fabric, the glint of a metal tool, and the sound of someone whispering. Karen. She wasn't alone this time. Two figures crouched beside her, prying at the latch of the back gate. One held a camera. The other had what looked like a tranquilizer dart gun. My heart slammed in my chest. She was trying again, this time under the cover of darkness, hoping no one would catch her in the act. Before I could even shout, Daisy moved. It wasn't fear that drove her this time, it was instinct. She charged toward the noise, wings spreading wide, a blur of feathers and fury. The sound of her feet hitting the ground was thunderous, powerful enough to shake the boards of the fence. Karen screamed. The two men jumped back, one dropping the dart gun as Daisy's long legs struck the gate. It rattled violently but held firm. The men bolted, sprinting toward the street. Karen stumbled after them, clutching her phone, still recording even as she ran. Her panic filled the air, ragged breaths, the sound of shoes scraping against pavement, the high-pitched ring of a phone hitting the ground. I turned on the floodlights and called the police. My voice was calm, steady, even as adrenaline surged through me. Within minutes, the cul-de-sac was alive again. Sirens, flashing red and blue lights cutting through the night, neighbors gathering on their lawns in robes and slippers. When the officers arrived, I handed them everything. Security footage, photos, timestamps. They didn't have to dig hard. Karen's phone had fallen just inside my property, still recording. The video showed everything. Her sneaking onto the property, ordering the men to catch the bird, and her panicked retreat when Daisy defended herself. There was no talking her way out this time. The officers questioned her on the curb, their flashlights illuminating her pale, shaken face. She stammered through excuses, claims of evidence collection, community safety, and self-defense. but no one was buying it. One officer quietly read her rights as they led her to the car. She wasn't arrested for assault or animal cruelty or any single act, but for the accumulation of everything: trespassing, falsified reports, harassment, and illegal use of a tranquilizer device. The men she'd hired were found later that night, hiding behind a dumpster at the end of the street. They admitted she'd promised them cash to help remove a dangerous animal. They didn't know it was illegal. By dawn, the neighborhood was silent again, except for the faint chirping of birds and the low hum of news vans that had already started lining the curb. Word spread fast, faster than any HOA rumor ever could. By morning, Karen's reputation was in ruins. The HOA released a statement distancing themselves from her actions, calling them unauthorized and deeply regrettable. The president personally visited me to apologize, promising that all fines and violations related to Daisy would be cleared. He even admitted that the board had been misled by Karen's fabrications. Daisy, unaware of the chaos she had survived, was calm again, pecking gently at the grass, occasionally glancing toward me as if checking that everything was back to normal. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood began to heal. People who had avoided me before now stopped by to see Daisy from a respectful distance. Kids pointed and laughed, fascinated by her tall, graceful stance. Even the local paper wrote a short piece about her: the ostrich that outsmarted an HOA. Karen's house stayed empty for a long time. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Rumor had it she was moving to another state, somewhere quieter, somewhere without ostriches or HOAs. The day the moving truck pulled away, I stood on my porch watching from afar. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, just relief. The kind that comes after surviving something exhausting, but necessary. When the last of the noise faded, I turned back toward the yard. Daisy was waiting near the fence, her long neck tilted curiously toward the spot where Karen used to stand and glare. For a moment, it almost felt poetic. I opened the gate and stepped inside. Daisy followed me, her long strides silent against the grass. The sun was setting again, the same soft orange glow that had filled the sky the day she first arrived. The neighborhood was peaceful, really peaceful this time. Daisy pecked at the ground, then looked up, blinking in that slow, almost thoughtful way she had. She didn't know she'd won. She didn't need to. All she'd ever wanted was space. And now at last, we both had it.